another channel. We're going to call this our base. We'll leave it at 50%, and we're going to fill that in. Now, our white should actually be more accurately represented if it was at 75, since we have a base underneath it. So the base, I leave it 50 because it's literally going to look like this after it's printed. It's not going to come out like this, 100% white. It's going to look like this. So we leave our base at 50% opacity. We have our red going on top, we have our white going on top of that, and we have our black. Now we have a little bit of a problem that we need to address, and you can see it when we turn the red on and off. Basically, the base is sticking out of the sides of all the red color. We can't have that. You'll see that throughout the entire shirt, and it'll be impossible to print this and make it look nice and clean if we were to leave it like that. So what we need to do is go in and choke it back to where literally the base starts to come back a point or two, not two, you want to bring it back about a point inside of the red, so it stops before the red stops, and that way you can't see it after everything prints. So to do that, let's select the red, and we'll make sure we're on our base. We're going to have white in our front here, even though you can do it in the stroke palette. We're going to just hit X until you get your white there. Go to stroke. There's where you can do it if you need to, but I like doing it over here. And we want to stroke this 2 pixels to the center. And when I do that, you see how it pulls it back. Let me push in a little bit more and I'll undo through that so you can see. There's before and there's our after. And essentially, you turn the red on and you can see now the red prints over, it overlaps that base. The base stops. So now we're not going to have any of that base showing out. And since we have white next to it, that stroke essentially gave us this between the red area here and the white that goes down there. And that is completely fine. In this case, we get really close in here. There's our base, and here's our little separation between our red and our white. There's our red print. You can see it goes over. And here's our white print, and that goes over just a little bit. Now, it's completely safe, and it is good practice, actually, to have your white on the edges of wherever the white is. If it's just white on top of a base, to leave it but registered as it is there. So those are the same. Whoops, that's red. Here's base. There's our white. It's exactly the same. If we go and we look at the separation between our red, there's our base, and there's our white. It pushes over a little bit. And that's okay in this case because we don't want this red here. When that red prints, the smallest stroke that is, that 1% stroke, that 1 point stroke, is going to help the t-shirt actually suck up some of this red ink and some of that white ink. So what that does essentially is, as this is getting printed and the red goes down, the red is wet and the white is wet as well. And if you put 2 wet inks together and then on top of that you print another black screen, even though this black isn't touching these areas, the squeegee bar goes down the whole thing, or the squeegee goes down the whole thing. So it essentially starts to smush these things together, and they get you get what's called bleeding between the 2 colors, and we don't want that. So this little part of the base here will help that. This doesn't work every single time. This is printers will tell you it's a personal preference. You can print the base, flash that, print the red and flash the red, and then print the white and the black. By flashing, I mean you literally cure on the press the ink, and then you go, well, you don't cure it 100%, but you cure it enough to where it doesn't start to smear into everything else. Then you can print your white and your black afterwards. But that's pretty much that for our base. I hope that wasn't too winded. It seems it might be a little bit. So we've checked everything. We've got everything the way that we want it. What we want to do now is start to set this up for our final SEP file. But before we do that, remember we called this SEPs working. So what we want to do is we want to save it. And we want the most recent part of this as how we are now. We want that saved because in the future, if you need to come back to this file, it's saved in this state right before you take it to SEP. So if you need to make any changes, you can make a change and plug that in. I'll probably show you that in a future tutorial, but for this case, we just want to save it, and we want to start getting rid of everything else so we only have our spot colors, and I'll show you how to turn those over to spot in a second here. So let's start to get rid of our channels. Let's delete our channels that we don't need. We're going to keep our base, our red, our white, and our black, obviously, because that's all it's printing. We're going to turn these to spot at this point. So you double click, do it again. You double click on the channel itself, and then you'll get this dialog box, and we want to change it to spot. And since you can't see white, we're going to need to type some of this stuff out in Illustrator. You can't see white. We want to change it to a different color. Some people like to use light grays for white. Some people like to use completely conspicuous colors, so you know that nobody's going to be printing this ugly lavender pinkish color. We'll leave it at that. And we'll call it 01-base. Now this is something that I do. That everybody has their own personal choices for this, and I'll show you why I do this later in Illustrator. And we're going to go through and repeat the process for everything else. So the red will be printing second. I'm going to name this 185 because I know that's the red that I want. Just a heads up too, you guys. You don't need to do this. You can go in if you want, but it's not necessary. I personally don't like doing it. I just use the color that matches what was going on in the layers itself, and then I call my colors out here. You can always change it later, but this will be 02, and I know I want this to print a 185. I was going to show you as well that 485, this will probably show a 485, which it did. This prints orange. It looks nice and red and really solid, but a lot of times a 485 will print orange on top of a white. It looks orange. It doesn't look like this nice, brilliant red. 200 is a good red. 185 is a good red. So we'll stick with those. And change it to spot for the white. And we'll change it some conspicuous colors so we know it's there. Call it 3. White, black is 4. And let's just double check to make sure everything is a spot color now. And the last step is we'll make sure we don't have any paths because that could really mess you up. So everything's a spot. Layers we don't worry about anymore because they don't exist. And we're going to save it. I'm going to put this in my finals folder and just name it KS SEPs. Here's the important part, guys. DCS 2.0. You don't save this as a Photoshop file at this point, a PSD. We're going to save it as a DCS2. And we're going to make sure our spot colors are on and hit save. These are the settings that you want to use afterwards. You could use TIFF 1-bit, but it looks really messed up when you get it into Illustrator. So I use TIFF 8-bit. TIFF 8, whoops, shouldn't have done that. Let me undo that. And let me go back to save. Remember, 2.0 EPS, we'll replace that. So TIFF 8 bits. We got that selected. And then we want single file with color composite. Single file with color composite. ASCII I-85, although everything after that is no longer really of use. So don't worry about those. And then OK it. And there you go. That's our final